That's a,
Wait till you do USB A to B to C.
Yes,
Thunderbolt
yes.
and the
Yes.
different voltages.
I'm all about,
Do you
I'm all about being
cable?
connected, right?
Which one?
Well, it's like, well, okay, so welcome to our behavior, as we're talking about technology. My thing is, let's FaceTime and show me what you have in your hand, or show me what's on your screen, right? That's probably what you guys do.
I did that, my greatest accomplishment was that I helped my mom, who lived in Idaho, change a power supply in a desktop computer only over video, and
Wow.
it works.
Wow. Well, you know, YouTube.
I have another person on the call too.
Oh, that's helpful, that's helpful. But you know what? YouTube is amazing. I mean, it's almost, I use it for plumbing or whatever.
It's hard work.
Well, yeah, I don't go that far. That would really be scary. Okay, how do you guys doing? Good? Okay, week 5. You have finals or midterms and stuff.
Get through them.
Getting through them, knocking them out, right? Okay. Well, this is a little bit different class because we're talking about, we're not talking about quantitative stuff, right? We're talking about all that squishy stuff that comes about because we have to work with people, most of it, yeah? I realize I usually get pushback from some of the IT folks who say, no, I just want to be in a room, in a basement with a bunch of equipment. I'm like, well, you know, that's great, but at some point, that equipment has to interface with other people. Whether you talk on the phone or not, you know. Okay, so we done a bunch of work as an individual, right? We've talked, and I mentioned in the week 1, we would start with the individual and then we'd work out to teams and then we'd work out to an entire organization. So we are now moving into this whole era or this area of groups and teams of people. So now we just complicated everything exponentially. So what motivates, if we're a team in this room, what motivates each of us might be completely different. And we may even have different goals. You know, some of you just want to get credit and pass the class. Others want to get a 4.0 in all your classes. And some of you are sort of in between. You're all about work-life balance. So now, and that's just one thing. And then we all communicate differently, everything. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about groups and teams. You probably visited this in management class, I'm thinking at least, okay? So groups and teams are a little bit different. So, you know, obviously you need at least 2 people for a team, and there needs to be a specific purpose, okay? And it's interdependent, meaning that you're not, and this is a mistake that a lot of students make, you're not just dividing up the work and doing it separately and then hoping that it makes sense when you all paste it together, okay? It's coordinated, and what one person does explodes into what somebody else does. And really critical thing is we hold each other accountable, which is something that rarely happens in student teams, okay? And humans are social creatures. And teams are a place where that comes into play. So here's kind of a difference. By the way, most of what I'm showing you is the same type of content, but it's coming from different sources. So groups, right? So we have kind of common identity, et cetera. But with teams, that critical piece is we're interacting, we're working together as one, and we're holding each other accountable. So there's a book written in 1989, which is still relevant and is still referenced. And there's a lot of research on teams, trust me. The title of the book is What Must Go Right, What Can Go Wrong. And so you can see here their research was pretty extensive. And these are the things that they found were present in most effective teams. So, Annette, did I share the screen with you? Okay, good. Okay, so I want you guys to look at this list. Think about the teams that you've been on. Which one or two of these do you think are the most important? Or the most difficult?
Competent team members is pretty crucial. It kind of makes or breaks whether you can have an effective team.
Yeah,
Whether they can do their job.
and who decides that? Who decides who the team is, who the team members are?
It's the team manager or whatever.
That's usually a boss
Yeah.
or an instructor. You don't usually get to say, I want to be on this team with these people, right? And so, yeah, that is one of the areas I think that students have issues with. What about other ones for the rest of you?
I think in school projects, unified commitment is hard. Because like you said, everybody has a different amount of work they feel like putting in.
And if you're gonna get a grade anyway, right? So if we're one team and you're like, well, I'm really busy, I'm gonna get a team grade. And Ben over here, he's an overachiever. I know if I drop the ball, he's gonna take over anyway. And you'll rationalize it like he's the best person. He likes this stuff. He's gonna do it anyway. You convince yourself it's okay not to do anything, right? And I just find this fascinating that in all the classes where I've used Teams, which is a lot, I get complaints all the time about soccer, all the time. They want me to kick people off. They want me to do all this stuff. And then when I do an anonymous survey of the students and ask them if, their amount of work, like, from slacking to overachieving, they're all on the high performance end. And I'm like, how can this be?
Because you never snitch. That's the rule.
Yeah, but if you're talking about yourself, right? So if I'm sending a survey out and I'm asking for you
Yeah.
to say, right? And it's anonymous, so they should be honest. But people never admit, right?
That's right, yeah. You snitch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and when they have to evaluate each other, they almost always give everybody the top score on every category, right? So my final question, for those of you who haven't heard this before, is you're gonna have me in a lot of classes, right? Okay. The last question is, would you like to serve on a team with this person again? And I will make sure that happens. And that's the only one where they're honest. And they say, no, thank you. That's my clue, right there. Like they're done,
Yep.
and it's careful. I mean, nobody else sees it but me. And I'm grading. You're not grading. I'm grading. That's my job, right? I'm just trying to help. And the other thing is, if you're going to be a manager, you have to be able to evaluate other people's performance. That's what a manager does. So,
Could that be that the goal isn't, the teams and classes are given a goal. It's
Right.
not their dream to complete this assignment, right?
right.
But if I made a team or if I was on a team where I actually, it's not that you don't care, but
Right.
it's not your passion, right?
Right.
But if you actually were passionate, you might have a little more skin in the game. So you might be like, okay, this person is dragging us down. Like because I actually need to get this done, or I want to get this done.
Yeah.
Do you think that contributes to it some?
I do, and I also think the length of time really contributes, right? Because if you know that this is a year-long project,
Oh, yeah.
okay, now we gotta make it work. But if you know that, so it's week 2, you're choosing your teams, you don't get started until week 3 or 4. And then you're gonna do something in week 10.
Well, there's a lot of, a lot of jobs. The more is put on, like, can't you just get along for a little bit? Then like. Nobody cares if you don't like somebody, and in fact, if you make that known, it makes your life harder in a lot of work environments, so.
Yeah.
That's not encouraged. I mean, it's not encouraged anywhere but maybe in a classroom, or you're asking to.
Yes. And a big difference is at work, you're getting paid.
Right.
do this. In class, you're paying us,
That's
suffer.
also true.
right? So, that's a little bit different too. Yeah, okay, so, collaborative climate. Yeah, I think I traditionally see not just a slacker, but for me, the other concerning personality trait I see is the know-it-all, right? They know everything. They've already decided what we're gonna do. They're telling you what to do, and they're just running the show. And I had a team in an MBA program, and this guy was a bully, and the others just gave up. They were just like done with it. They get up to give their presentation, and he, was leading the way. They missed the entire purpose of the assignment. They missed the main question of what they were supposed to do and answer. And so I said, well, right now you don't have a passing grade. Would you like somebody else to step forward and answer the actual question? And of course, then they were you could just see they were so angry. But the others stepped up, and then I did a debrief with them and said, you guys, everybody in this group is to blame for what happened. You can say one person pushed too hard, but remember that the thing that differentiates a team is holding each other mutually accountable. And it's hard, but there were 3 other people who caved. If they had joined together, they could have done this.
Well, what are their personality types, I mean, if you have, that happens all the time. That guy's gonna be a manager.
So,
I'll be CEO.
Yeah, that's right, it's C-level quality right there, a bully
Exactly.
and a know-it-all.
Actually, he ended up opening his own business because he couldn't get along with
You said the CEO.
me. Right.
Then he has it's like, where's the government hate small business, like that's the next jump.
Yeah, so actually this was MBA. So I will tell you that in a graduate business program, most people are goal setters, overachievers, get it done, go after it. And they're not quiet, introspective, these are hard driving people for the most part. And I realize that's a stereotype, but you can see some different majors attract some personality styles, right? Which makes sense. If you want to be out doing survey work, you're not going to be somebody who hates being outside. Yeah. So, okay. So
You'd be surprised.
here's a model. I don't think this came from your book, but I honestly don't remember. I think it came someplace else. So here are the 2 things in the middle are the things that we want to spend a little bit of time focusing on as we're creating our team. So, what is the task at hand, right? What do we need to accomplish? So that will tell us, like how many people do we need? What skill sets do we need? What composition, etc. And then we have to figure out, once we select all those people, how to make it work. And this is the tricky part. This is the relationship part. This is where everything blows up. But if we can do that, and notice that the last 2 are cohesiveness and trust. Trust is big. And that's why you can't build trust in a few weeks, like 3 to 5 weeks, which is one of the reasons why student teams rarely end up at a high performing level. They're at a good performing level, but to get to that super place, you need to be around each other more. And if it works, then our individual motivational needs are met, and we met our goal for our team, and we didn't kill each other, right? So I will tell you a sad story. When I was in my MBA, we were put in cohorts. It was a 2-year program, and we went through the summers. We had 4 weeks off in the middle. That was it. And for 2 years, we did not select the teams, they were selected for us. And the rule was, because it was an accelerated program too, there was teamwork in every class. And that was part of your grade, okay? You could not change your team. If you left your team, you left the program. Okay, it was really harsh. They did hire a team consultant to work with the teams, right? We did some initial bonding exercises and stuff like that. Well, my team, we had a slacker, extremely bright young man. He had created 2 startups. The first one he sold for a lot of money. Then he started his next startup and it was already successful. But he came from this family of, like, his sister was married to the son of the CEO of McDonald's. This was a bunch of CEOs and corporate suits, and they thought they didn't get him. He should have stayed doing what he did best, but he wanted to please his parents. So he didn't do any work on our team. And we let him do that. There were 5 of us. The rest of us just carried him. And the first time he was supposed to be the lead, because you had to switch around. We show up for class, and okay, this was a while ago. So he had our presentation, the visual part. At that time, it was actually on a CD, I think. And he didn't show up for class. This was a really rigorous class. And they pulled the team name out of a random drawing. And you presented or you failed. That was it. You couldn't say, oh, so-and-so's late. Doesn't matter. You get up, you present whether you're ready or not, right? So we're sitting there, he's not there. First team presents. Second team, second drawing. Not us. And we were like, oh my God, what are we gonna do? And we were like texting each other when the instructor couldn't see us. Okay, because he had all of our information. And we got a message during the break after the second presentation that he was on his way. He shows up as the instructor pulls our team name out of the random drawing. Now, by now, you can imagine we've been like this, and we're just like a puddle. I mean, we've got nothing left. We're just exhausted. He walks in, and this guy is such a showman. He just lit up that room. And he had our gorgeous visuals and our video, all kinds of stuff that we'd done. And he delivered it. And we were like, you know, and we were so PO'd in him because he hadn't done any of it. That was our work. And everybody thought he was just like the cat's meow. Well, it didn't take long for them to figure out. And he almost failed because he didn't turn in his individual assignments, which were half his grade. And we had to do a thesis, which he hadn't completed. And he finally turned everything in, barely passed, and made it to graduation. But right before graduation, so it was like 3 weeks before the end, and we had this big stuff due, right? The end of our, like a capstone, like you guys do. And we had an engineer who worked for PCC on my team, and this guy, and they were polar opposites, and they weren't talking to each other. And there were 2 of us kind of in the middle, and we had to figure out how to make this work. And so we called in the team consultant, right? And he looked at us, he goes, 2 years, you guys, you have 3 weeks left, suck it up and go to the finish line. There's not anything I can do in 3 weeks after 2 years of this crap. So that was a really hard lesson to learn. And ever since then, every team I've been in, it's all about holding each other accountable. And you don't have to be mean about it. You can do it in a really nice way, right? But we should have held him accountable from the very beginning. And we were just as much to blame as he was. But it was a painful 2 years, I'm telling you. Okay, So speaking of that, we failed in the very beginning. This is Bruce Tuckman's model of formation of performing teams. So some of you may have heard of this. We usually talk about it in management class. So here I'm going to show you a picture diagram of it, but it starts with the forming, and this is where we come together for the first time. Okay, so in the forming stage, this is where we get to know each other, and this is where we make our rules of engagement. This is where we have to figure out our bylaws. How are we going to make this team work? What happens is people come together and they're all in their best behavior. It's kind of like a first date where you're not totally honest. And so you agree to things that you don't really think you can follow through on, but everybody else wants it, so you'll try. And then you hit the storming place because people are not making good on their promises and nobody's doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? Because they didn't really make good rules. Like, how do you decide how long do we brainstorm? What do we do if there's 4 on a team and our vote is 2 against 2? How do we solve that conflict? How do we solve conflict if somebody doesn't meet our deadlines, right? What do we do with all that? That should all be decided before it happens. So you get into the storming place, which trust me, is really ugly. My team spent almost 2 years there. It is not a pleasant place to be. What normally happens here is that it is so painful that the team goes back and does what they should have done in the first place and establishes the rules of engagement. And then once they do that, and they've all jockeyed for what positions they want, and they figure out whose skills are what, then they can do norming. And that's where you're pumping along on all cylinders. Things are going well, right? You're just moving along, getting it done, but you're not at a stage of excellence yet. You're just getting it done, but it feels so good. It feels so good after storming that you kind of want to hang there for a while. This is where most student teams end up if they do well. If you can then take that, develop trust, take some opportunities and some chances, you can move to the high performing stage, okay? Now, in Tuckman's model, these arrows on the left side, the solid arrows, he said you had to go through these stages, starting at the beginning all the way through in order. But since then, our research has shown us that teams go back and forth. So you might lose a team member, you might get a new team member, the goal might change, resources change, something changes, right? So like in our case, we tried to go back to forming, but we only have 3 weeks left. So, and then the research and the workplace today reminds us that a lot of teams are project teams. So there's a point at which we need to disband. And there's a way to do that, you know, where you're celebrating what you've accomplished, people are feeling good about it, and then you can move on to something new. So, have you guys seen this before? Tuckman? Okay. All right. Time for you guys to weigh in. I want you guys to just break into your own little groups, 2 or 3 of you, whatever, it doesn't matter. I want you, without me listening in, I want you to come up with your top 5 pet peeves of working in teams, whether it's students or work, and then your number 1 frustration, okay? And they can be the same ones, and then we'll share, okay? And have you figured out how to fix those? So, Annette, do you just want to do it by yourself? Is that okay? All right, just take a couple of minutes. You can move around. I don't care. Curtis, did you ever find your app?
It's done.
Oh, did I leave my tea here or is that yours?
That's my tea.
Oh,
Get your own tea.
get my own tea.
No, she's trying to take my tea.
Oh, look, I have one.
You gotta work on
Well, I'm always leaving stuff on students' desks.
Oh, are you?
Yes, I am. You guys can all meet together if you want, I don't
I was
care.
gonna say, there's only 6 of us.
Yes,
This is one
yes.
group.
Okay.
Yes.
You guys even have 5? Like, I don't, maybe that's my problem, is I don't care enough to have 5 separate things like that.
Top 5 behaviors.
Like, I feel like if you're holding 5 in your brain, you're being too negative. Like,
I don't know, if they don't show up. That's like.
Yeah. A presentation day, if they don't show up for presentation day.
I've had that happen.
We've had that happen before, yeah. That's never fun.
I got not showing up at all, so literally not participating.
Yeah.
Doesn't do their work.
Yeah, we have procrastination
Yeah.
work.
All right, should we let Annette go first?
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
Annette, we're
She's the only
interested.
one who survived last week anyway.
Yeah, you see her team is very big, right? Her group.
they're focused though.
Okay, so so you want me to just,
Tell us what your pet peeves are, and if you have a top one, and if you know how to deal with it, or things maybe you've tried. Or
okay,
others, it doesn't have to be you, it could be others that you've
okay.
heard about.
So far I really just got my top 5 behaviors that they're the worst.
All right, let's hear it.
So it's the railroaders, the ones who are super hasty and adamant and just want to push it through without being aware of like quality, no focus on quality. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
The loafers, they're lazy and absent. The task or role thieves, they do things for others that they feel are incompetent just to make sure it gets done, or because they think they can do it better, or whose roles they covet. So I've seen that happen. I put the coopster, like a coup d'etat, where they seize the leadership role for themselves if they feel that no one else could do it as well as they could, or if they feel the leader is not doing a good job, they just sort of step in and take control. That makes things awkward. And then the silent majority, where most of the ideas come from 1 or 2 people, and they just really don't participate or add to the discussion or the project.
I like that. So let's talk about the last one, because I don't think this group talked about that. Did you?
No, not really.
No. So it sort of meets the story I told about a couple of years where the person took over and the others just let go. So how could we fix a team like that? How do we encourage people to step up?
Proactively ask everyone individually
Mhm.
instead of asking as a group, kind of put you on the spot and thought Curtis and then go down the line. That way everyone has something thrown at them.
So one thing I've noticed is, and we're going to do a communication exercise in this class where you may have done this before, where you fill out a questionnaire and then there are like 4 main categories. And the one that I work on, we use colors, but some people have used birds or animals, right? One of those 4 is your social person, the glue that brings people together, right? Who has just the best social skills. You want one of those on every team, right? So a team is best if you have people with different skills, like you've got the goal setter, somebody who is keeping us on task, because people like me who are the brainstormers, we're the people who are like, hey, I had a great idea as you're walking up to do your presentation, right? It's like, oh, we should have added this, or what about that? And it's like, yeah. So I learned a long time ago not to do that. But you want those people in the beginning who are really getting it going and doing your research, right? People who like to research. So you have different skills among those personalities. And if you have nobody that can step up and try to bring people together, right? And you can go individually to people and ask. I think one of the best things we can do for many of these is in the group is to ask people. So like one of the rules of engagement that I had in a team was when we're brainstorming, we're in a circle and everybody gets whatever we decide, 1 minute. And when your minute's up, you stop talking and it goes to the next person. And if they don't have anything to say, they can pass. You know, you don't have to talk. But what happens then is that equalizes it and people tend to speak up a little bit more, especially if you do a lot of it. And it shuts out the person that's taking over, right? Because they had all the great answers, right? So Annette, have you seen a way to fix this or not?
No. As a female introvert, I am not typically the leader of a group. I am not typically the person who solves things or brings people together, or at least not in the past. I think I've probably learned a lot during my college education that would help me going forward, but that is not a problem I've been able to solve in the past.
Yeah, that's a hard one, especially if, you know, in certain types of jobs or industries will, as we said before, attract a certain type. Like if you get a bunch of salespeople together, oh my gosh, loud, extroverted, everybody's got an idea, right? I mean, it can be a very energizing environment, but it can be extremely exhausting if you're not in that, right? And so we can also have the type of job where people are, by introvert, what that really means is we're processing ideas internally before we share externally. So I know this might be a shock, but I'm an extrovert. So I process externally and that helps me then come up with my ideas. But if you're an internal processor, that is irritating and distracting and can be sensory overload for you because your brain is trying to do something else, right? So, and I don't know if you've been to leadership class yet, but there is research that tells us that introverts actually can make excellent leaders. You do not have to be charismatic. You do not have to be an extrovert to be an exemplary leader. There are other more important qualities, okay? It's all about style, so. And I put you in that category, Annette, so just saying. All right, should we hear from the big group? Okay, you were taking notes, yes? Do you want to be the jump off or somebody else?
Well, I kind of wrote down my version of them all.
Okay, that's all right. Hey, you write it, you get it.
Yeah. So I actually didn't even really write down the. No,
I wrote down here.
okay.
Okay, all right, so Ben will be your wingman?
Yes.
Okay,
So we got one of the biggest ones is like procrastination. People maybe not doing stuff when there's a sign to it. Figured that would be like the fix is assigning stuff, putting stuff on the people instead of just saying this is all the work you got to do. The hero going out and doing their own thing. Not showing up for in-person stuff like presentations and stuff. Delegating yourself the easiest job just because, you know, that's the way to go.
mhm.
And then general laziness. I think we agreed that maybe your way of confronting issues that could happen is probably the easiest way to deal with it later, because
Mhm.
if you have someone that's not doing something week after week after week, on week 5, you confront them and they're like, I thought this was okay, and it was obviously acceptable all the other weeks I was here.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Silence is validation, you guys. And, you know, it's just like somebody shows up to work in an outfit that clearly is offensive or, I mean, I had somebody show up for work one time and she was very scantily clad. And I had a lot of complaints. I had to send her home to redress. And, but if you're not going to talk to that person in front of everybody else, you're going to pull them aside, right? But other people, if you don't say something, they're going to assume, oh, I didn't know I could wear clothes like this. And it just starts. So yeah, you can't just ignore. Ignoring doesn't make it better, right? Okay. Ben, you got some things to add?
Really, I mean, you covered all the points, but it is really what our biggest solution was making sure the team communicates and that expectations are there in the beginning and they're honest expectations. And you don't just sit in silence and let it fester over time. It just makes things worse. So you make sure everybody's communicating and knows what everybody's doing. And that's how the team can forward.
So I heard you guys talk about, what do you do if you talk, let's say you talk to somebody who they don't answer your email or your text. They don't show up for meetings, whether they're virtual, in person, whatever. They're not contributing on maybe a shared document, however you do it. They're just MIA. And so you all reach out and you reach out. And so now your alternative is we want to vote them off the island, right? So I do allow that. I do allow that in my classes, but you have to go through me first, right? So we have to do kind of an intervention, right? Because a number of students, particularly in certain majors, want to work by themselves. They don't want to deal with all this stuff. They don't want to deal with other people. They don't want to deal with slackers. They just are going to do all the work themselves, and they don't want to be in a team. And so that's not allowed. That's why a lot of instructors say you can't fire somebody off your team, okay? So what I tell people is if you're fired off a team, you don't get to do it by yourself. You get a 0 in that for a grade, which changes the narrative for that person, right? Because they don't want that. But yeah, I think you guys are right. I think it's really important to really establish those rules. And I like the idea before you start doing rules of in the group, go around the group and really share your pet peeves, right? So if your pet peeve is somebody always shows up late, okay, well, my sister, the one who doesn't know what a USB is what we call a red personality, which you will learn about. And she is, she makes me look like I'm really shy and introverted, okay? She's an entertainer, right? And she never shows up on time because she always makes a fashionable entrance, but she'll come with party hats or drinks or food with her because we should all enjoy ourselves, right? And she thinks that makes up for it. It's okay to be late if you stopped at Starbucks and bought treats and drinks for everybody. And we're like, no. I mean, that's great. Sometimes yes, but you don't get to decide that. You can ask us before you go if we're okay with that, right? So in her mind, so the reason I bring this up is what does late mean, right? You know, the engineer that I worked with from PCC, if you didn't get there 10 minutes before the meeting started, you were late.
Well, that's a military thing there.
And
Not
he was-
15 minutes earlier, 10 minutes late.
Yeah, yeah, pacing and irritated. By the time everybody arrives and gets started, he's already spun out, you know. So we also have to define our terms, not just, okay, you need to be on time, you need to respond within, you need to respond to emails. Well, what does that mean? Are you talking 12 hours, 24 hours, a week, right? What's timely? So you have to make sure you're not just doing general rules of engagement, right? And that, if you don't, that's what will happen in storming because, you know, late is different in everybody's book. So, okay, so did you have any kind of consensus, or were there some that rose to the top? As far as frustrations, pet peeves? Or are they all different?
I mean, we just kind of cranked out 5 of them and then.
Okay.
here and there,
Okay,
but I think, yeah, we went over those a little bit.
okay, well, let me ask each person. So Quinn, what's your top pet peeve, do you think?
Just not doing anything.
Okay,
Not showing up on the days, that's the worst one. Especially presentation day, not showing up.
you've been burned, haven't you?
Oh, I have.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Super.
I've been the only one in a 4-person team before. And-
I had that happen to somebody. And you know what? I gave her an A+, and the team, or the class was amazing. Because I said, okay. I mean, she had her phone with some of their notes in it, and she did the best that she could. And the class, where they were smiling and nodding and encouraging. It was amazing. It was amazing to see how the class came together for that. I don't know what your experience was like, but.
Yeah, it was, we already had our stuff already all put together. It came to presentation day to stand up, everybody just didn't show up.
Oh.
So I did have PowerPoint, I did have minutes, but. I just-
Well, that's
I just
good.
didn't know. Yeah.
Yeah, she didn't have the link either, but yeah.
I like the collaborative one that you had up there, just because most of the time in a school setting, no one wants to be the leader. And then, you know, I like doing stuff that I have no idea what I'm doing. That way I can figure out if I'm good at it or not. And
Mhm.
other people just say, oh, you're good at that. That's all you're going to do. And it's like, okay, I guess that's what I'm going to do.
Mhm.
So it's kind of
Yes, that's
mulling it
important.
over.
Yeah, no, it is. And on the MBA team that I was on, the engineer said to me at the very beginning, he said, okay, if you teach me how to write, well, I'll teach you statistics. And I'm like, sold, because he wrote in tables and graphs and numbers and formulas. And we had to write all these essays. And I'm a writer, but I'd never had a stats class before my MBA. So my first stats class was a master's level stats class.
How did that happen? That's
Oh,
fair.
it was rugged. But I got a B+, and I'm darn proud of that,
So about 200 level stats class. So
Oh, he was
that's pretty good.
amazing. He was so patient. He tutored me. But anyway, all right. Pet peeve.
Oh, I'd rather that people don't show up if they're not gonna do anything. If people are there and not doing anything, that's just making me angry just thinking about it, to be honest with you.
So let me ask you this, Eli. I've had this happen a number of times where people didn't show up
Yeah,
throughout the term and they arrived for the presentation.
yeah,
Have you had that happen? I mean, that happens to me all the time in class, and the team is like, what do we do with them?
yeah, I mean, I would just ignore them. Like, I would just not give them anything to say, it's like, no, we did the presentation, you can stand over there. But
So you would hold them accountable.
yeah, you don't reward that behavior.
But if you ignore them, you give them what they want, which is, I mean, I heard you guys talking about just ignore them if they're not going to be part of it, but that's really giving them what they want because they're not being held accountable. They're not working.
No, you lock them out and then you say they didn't do any work. It's a two-parter. You don't give them anything to do because they're not helping, and then you say they didn't contribute.
Right. So what if the instructor says all people on the team must participate or must present?
They're not on our team anymore.
Yeah.
It's a shame.
Okay. Well, I'm personally okay with that.
Yeah, I mean.
But it's a pretty drastic thing to vote somebody off the island, And my thing is, if you're complaining, you can't wait until what I hate is the night before the presentation, I get emails from a team.
You don't have to vote somebody off, you can just soft lock them off.
Yeah, of course they could, if you're getting a team grade only and not an individual piece, they can bring your team down.
Yeah,
Yeah,
That's almost worth it though. I'd almost rather take the hit.
yeah, yeah. Well, and, okay, so I'll hold my thought. Go ahead.
I really fall into his same exact zone. I just can't stand people who don't do their part.
Mhm,
Yes. Well, yeah, whether that they're not being, whenever we have any sort of like meeting,
mhm,
because usually at the start of things, everything's all, organized, who does what here.
mhm,
And then they're doing their part, they're like, hey, like we have to like take over his job now, plus they're trying to like figure it out or what, because he's not there. Or if he is there, but he just is not doing his work, it's like, so now because we need his part sometimes, I keep on moving, it, he's not doing it,
mhm,
so then everybody has to take on his workload, so everybody's bad,
mhm.
and it's just, yeah.
And one of the things I have seen with teams is they're very forgiving if somebody has a crisis,
Yeah, but
like a kid in the hospital or something.
that is different.
And then, but typically, if the teammate who is having the crisis comes forward and says, this is what's going on. What can I do to contribute? I can't do this. I'm in the hospital, right?
Yeah.
The team will rally around that and it usually works out okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I'm fine with it, if
'Cause
he's
it's
not doing it
respectful.
for no reason at all, then it's, that's totally
Yeah.
different.
yeah. And it could be any of us. Any of us can have that issue happen at some point, right? Yeah, good. Ben?
I agree. I mean, I'm on the boat that if they're not showing up during the allotted times, that's my, definitely my one pet peeve. I want to see them. I want to, be working with them.
Mhm,
I feel like I can work with people if they're with me in the room. I can at least give them something to do.
mhm.
But if they're not showing up throughout the term, that's my biggest.
So I taught in a cohort model program for undergrads and grads at a different school. And it was similar to my MBA where you were assigned a group, a team, and you were with that team for your entire 2 or 3 years, whatever it took you to get through your undergrad or your grad program. And so I did a lot of team interventions because you couldn't leave the team. And there's some scary stuff out there. I had a team person who was violent. We actually removed her from the school because she was threatening and dark, very dark. It was, I don't know what was going on. I'm not a psychologist, didn't want to know. I let the professionals handle it. And I did have somebody that had a lot of mental health issues and couldn't afford her medication. So she went off her meds. And fortunately, the team picked up that, everything was great. And then all of a sudden, everything was really weird. And so because they had been a team and working together, they tried to approach her, but then they went to their advisor and asked for help. And this person they were able to help get her what she needed and everything went back. So sometimes I think my thing is ask, right? A lot of times if you approach people and let them know it's important and they're important and ask, you'll get a read on whether or not they're actually going to participate or not. There is one type that you guys haven't mentioned that I see a lot among students, which is the overachiever who wants always to get a 4.0. And they spend all their time on all their individual assignments, knowing that they can still get an A in the class and just get a B or even a C+ on the team assignment. And they don't care. They don't care about you. They only care about their individual grade. And that's a hard one because they're totally capable. They have the skills, they have the drive. Yeah. Have you guys experienced that at all?
Yeah, it doesn't bother me as much. Because they don't have any reason to care about you other than they've been assigned a team. Their primary goal is they paid to be here and they want to get good grades. Maybe I'm saying this because I'm that person, that's not lost on me. But I think that that's sort of secondary. If they're doing their part and showing up and it's great, you did B+ work, let's go up there and present. That's way better than somebody who doesn't show up and drags you down. And it's if you're smart, capable, and showing up, what more can you really ask for? You know, what's reasonable to ask for in this
Right.
circumstance, but
So, and I do think that our school calendar, dictates a lot of what you're saying. So what if you're in a program where you're in this team for 2 years? And
yeah,
you're
I mean,
doing-
you can work with people like that. I think they're easier to work with than people who don't contribute.
Yeah.
But
So I do have a theory that matches what you're saying, which is in terms of motivation, personal motivation, it's a lot easier to redirect a flame than to try to light a fire, right? It's hard to get somebody to catch on fire than to redirect where the flame is going. Yeah.
you
So,
can you can point out how it's beneficial to them.
yeah,
And,
right.
you can probably make some progress on that, but.
Yeah. So, I don't think any of you have been in my management class, the 215. Okay.
No,
I haven't taught it for
I was in human resources management.
Yeah, probably.
Not the management.
the 215. I had to get rid of a couple years ago, so I don't think so. But where we did team charters in the beginning, it was an assignment and they got graded on it. And then halfway through the term, everything we did was in these groups, right? In class and everything. And then halfway through, we did a team assessment where they had to assess each other and their team. But for each assignment they did, I had the team write down exactly who did what on the work, and every team member had to sign it. So there were times when somebody would have to pull a 60-hour work week and they did almost nothing. And the team would acknowledge that. And then the next week, this person would pick up more and that would show. So I could see what was going on. And having them have to own and put down in writing what they actually did changed some of those people, particularly the ones who wanted a good grade, because it reflected on them personally, right?
Yeah,
So I don't know. It's a way of forced accountability, but yeah.
teams are kind of tribal, right? Like if you
They
help
are.
something, if you have goodwill and the group recognizes that, then you can get away with a lot.
Yeah.
Like you can, if they know that you're part of the team, so to speak, but if you ignore it or
Right.
shun it, then they're immediately all shun it.
Yeah. No, I
But
totally
that's the way those dynamics
Yeah.
work, right?
So in other words, I think that for the purposes of our classes in this school, the way I mean, 10 weeks is really short. We never really form teams. We form groups, right? And we just get through it. We do the best we can. And I think as people get farther along, I did with upper division, I started letting people choose their own teams. Because no one chose the slackers, so all the slackers were on one team. And that was really entertaining. That was really fun. Anyway, should we take a break?
Sure.
Let's take a break. Whenever you get back, like 10 minutes or less, okay? I'm gonna go ahead and pause the recording.
The Oregon Tech app, but also there's a different app called Z-Meet. They got an email about. It's like a social network that has like no one on it.
Yeah.
And it's very weird. Like I signed up for it. It's like, oh, okay, is this the place where everybody talks? It's like, no,
No,
this
it's not.
this just got released.
There's the
What's
message
going
board
on?
on the Oregon Tech app, and that seems to be the most social. But it's like 1 or 2 posts a week. Somebody's like, does anybody have anywhere I can live? Does anybody want to sell this textbook?
I didn't even know it was
Yeah.
interactive. I just thought it was a one-way communication because I didn't see a lot going on.
But you can respond to posts. It's like a Facebook wall, basically.
Yeah. Okay,
I'm
I'm not
trying
on
to
it
do
that
less of
much.
not more of it.
I don't really have a reason to be there. All right, so let's kind of wrap this up a little bit on teams. So remember how I said it's great to have a social person on your, somebody who is really good with relationship building on your team? They will be able to kind of figure out where everybody is and how to make it all work. from a relationship standpoint, which is a huge part of getting a team to work. So what we want to do is have people with different skills. Because if everybody does the same thing well, then all the other stuff, you've got people who don't do it well. So, so there are advantages and disadvantages, just like you've talked about diversity in all your classes. So you get more creativity, you get a better cross-section of people who might represent your audience, right? And yet diversity brings more creativity, idea creation, but it also brings more complexity. And with that more complexity comes, and differences come conflict, right? So it can take longer to get through Tuckman stages to that high performing place, because you have to figure out how to work with people who are different than we are, or you are. And then it's easier, especially if you don't have a relationship builder, to fall into the personality thing where conflict becomes personalized instead of task oriented. And that's when you get ugliness in your teams. So diversity is a good thing, but you also have to be able to manage it. So there's a wonderful little book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. It's a small book, it's a fable, you can read it in an afternoon. And it's fiction, but it's based on all this knowledge and research about teams. And what I love about it as you're reading it, and I used to assign it to one of my graduate leadership classes when we talked about teams, because we'd come together to talk about it and people would say, I was reading this and I'm like, oh my gosh, Tom at my work is just like this. And oh my gosh, I had so-and-so. So he's managed to capture the key types of dysfunctions that we see in a team. But his premise is this, that if you could get all the people in an organization rowing in the same direction, you could dominate any industry in any market against any competition at any time. Now, I don't know if you agree with that or not, but what he's saying is this is not something we do well. This is something that's done poorly. And being able to collaborate instead of being so individualistic. And when you take globalization classes, or you talk about country cultures, which we'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the term in here, you realize that bringing all of these different folks together is different. And in our culture, we're a very individualistic culture, and we're a very competitive culture. So that doesn't bode well for a collaborative team. And other cultures, and this is not a stereotype, this is built on research done in businesses around the world, that we can see patterns, cultural patterns. And a lot of times they have to do with a location. So for instance, if you live on a small island, like people in Japan, it's a very dense living situation. And so one of their cultural characteristics is that they are able to be very close proximity to people and still be private and wall them off. That's really, really interesting. People who live in remote mountainous regions have certain survival characteristics that they've learned, right? And maybe tribes who've been surrounded by warring other tribes, So there are some historical reasons why certain regions develop certain characteristics. But so for instance, in an Asian or even a Latin community, you're more likely to have emphasis on community and common good as opposed to individualistic. Here, the cowboy, right? Think about some of our sayings like pull yourselves up by the bootstraps, stuff like that. And that has served us well because a lot of new ideas and technology come out of our country, right? But you think about it, others adapt our ideas and figure out how to make them work well. So And in his book, he builds this triangle of things that that will derail your team. And notice the bottom of the pyramid is the absence of trust. Because without trust, you have nothing. You can't hold people accountable if you don't trust. If you don't trust that they're going to steal your idea or stab you in the back or not show up or whatever. So, but in order to build trust, we have to be vulnerable. So that's a hard thing, right? Another thing that derails teams is fear of conflict. So how do you hold somebody accountable if you're afraid to engage in any kind of conversation that might create differences, right? And so what that does is that creates this artificial harmony where we agree even though we don't really agree. We just say we agree with everybody. But it's hard. You know, you can say, well, that's really nice and they're helping the team out. But if they don't really agree, how do they make good on what their performance and what they're supposed to do? Because they don't really agree with the premise. And then all of this leads to a lack of commitment. And I think that was one of the things that you brought up in that list that we showed in the very beginning. So we have to have people who are actually committed to the team. And hopefully then we can hold ourselves accountable. But this absence of accountability is pervasive in teams. People don't want to deal with it. They don't want to do the hard work. It's uncomfortable. And most of us are not skilled enough. Again, if you have your relationship person, they know how to do this. And, you know, so the interesting thing is when students want to pick their own teams, they're looking for the smartest students in the room. Trust me, that is a recipe for disaster. Because a lot of times those folks are all about their own pursuit of something that has to do with their field or their interest or whatever. But if you don't have that relationship person, what happens when you start getting clashes of ideas, right? And of course, at the top, we have not paying attention to results. You know, again, what is our goal? And what gets in the way? Ego, right? Or status. I mean, I've seen so many people in business and industry who were passionate about what they were doing, about the work they were doing. And then as they moved up the ladder, they started to protect their position and their status where they were, their title, and stopped creating and stopped taking chances and started playing it safe. And so then you lose out on your results. So this comes out of this great little fable. So if you're interested in teams or it's part of some work you have to do for a project, I highly recommend that. And because trust is at the key of all of this, here is a very simple definition that positive expectations that one person has of another person in a situation involving risk. So if I'm going to be vulnerable and open myself up, I need to trust that Curtis is going to respect that and honor that and not go around and tell the rest of you all my secrets or whatever, right? So trust, hard to get. Okay, all right, so I have a little activity for you and I actually brought paper and I do have writing instruments. So you're gonna do, Annette, these are on Canvas under modules, week 5. Okay, so the first one is a 15 question questionnaire that you're going to fill out. And the instructions say, and then the second one is how to score it. So it comes from this Patrick Lencioni's theory. And so you'll see that in the scoring. Okay. So you can think about a team that you're part of, you have been part of. It's easier if you pick one team experience, because otherwise then it's hard to start answering the questions. It can be a team that you think was a really good team or a really bad team. Your choice. Okay, does anybody need a writing instrument?
Need a paper.
I do.
Oh, you need paper. Hold on.
I forgot again, didn't learn from last week to bring a pen.
Well, we have several of them. No, you don't have to bring one. Where are
It's
we?
okay. I didn't do my COVID screen for the last 5 weeks.
Yeah,
Yeah,
6 to
four
1.
I always bring a pen.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Thank you very much.
Yes. It just belongs on the desk when you're done.
I mean, I feel okay with this.
I wasn't listening, but it wasn't your fault. You want us to put our names on this?
No, it's for you.
Okay.
I'm gonna pause briefly. Okay, so interesting. How many people used a work setting? Okay, school. Okay, because it could be sports, could be a variety of things. All right. So, how did we do? Did anybody do, end up with a team that was in pretty good shape? Okay, all right. So what were the scores for your categories?
Starting at 1, 6, 7, 7, 8, 9.
Okay,
So I mean,
so you had two that were in really great shape, two
Yeah.
that are a little bit,
but some of them, you know, like, this was a school team, and so it's like, I don't really expect you to be like confessing about your home life at this point, so I think some of those scores could be tuned to address the fact that this isn't a long, like, this team doesn't have any longevity, it's like a 10-week term. We had a project to finish, and
Yeah.
everybody on the team I still am friends with, and so, I don't
Yeah.
know. We got an A on the project, you know, we're good.
that's good. Ben, did you have a so-so one or a,
Oh, some good things and some not so good things. I had a 9, 5, 6, 8, 6.
so a 9 and, absence of trust, but that's good, I mean,
You trust, you know.
Yeah.
There's a level of trust that.
that's
if you-
amazing.
Yeah,
That's a workable team, you can work with that. You can
yes.
fix other stuff. So yours was, your last two were your highest, is that right, 8 and 9?
Yeah.
So where was trust on yours?
It was a 6, but again,
But that's, yeah,
we were like freshmen in college, you know,
But-
it's like, what, I didn't trust anybody.
right, so you were focused on results, which is a
Yeah.
good thing, because going back to our very first conversation about commitment, people were focused on results, and you apparently were able to be accountable
Yeah.
to the goals of the team, so that's good. Okay, what about everybody else?
For the first one, I got a 7, then I got a 7, and then a 9, then a 5, and then a 7.
Okay, so accountability was your lowest.
Yeah, nobody wants to like call out each other necessarily, so that's kind of, yeah.
And most common, I think, right? What was your trust again?
Trust was a 7.
Okay, so I'm thinking that that's not bad, right?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that was a school
Yeah.
thing. So I'm thinking with more time and getting to know each other, if you were already starting to build some trust, that you might have been able to then, because I don't think you can have any accountability until you've gotten that first one going, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
My accountability and trust were pretty low too, just because it was school and
Mhm,
we set up what we all needed to do and didn't have any conflicts with work or anything. We all stuck with our avenue
mhm.
and did it all right.
Okay,
But I got a 4, 7, 9, 5, and 8.
okay, well, that makes sense. you have a 4 on trust and a 5 on accountability, right? And again, if you had an opportunity to, expand, maybe you could have built that. We don't know, because we don't know who the players are.
I picked low numbers on some of them, just because they didn't apply, like team members quickly and genuinely apologize to one another when they say or do something inappropriate or possibly damaging to the team. Like, we didn't have
Mhm.
very much of that, so I just put 1.
Okay,
But that, a low number on that statement kind of confuses me why it's attached to trust. I mean, if I had a 3 on that,
right,
then it sounds like we had a conflict in the group.
yeah,
So that's kind of confusing on
yeah.
the way they're doing.
Well, and it could be the way the questions were worded, because for me, not giving your all or just sort of floating along would have been a problem. But the way it's worded almost seems like it needs to be something more egregious to.
This or that, instead of,
Yeah,
was it good or bad?
yeah, yeah.
Did it happen?
Yeah, that's fair, that's fair.
Um,
How'd you do?
Inattention to results seems to be the worst one. It's a 4.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and lack of commitment is the other one. It's a 5. The rest of them are okay.
Okay.
I think that's probably true. Thinking about the team.
Mhm, mhm. And this is work setting,
Yeah.
which can make it hard. Some people are there for their paycheck, right? And it's not their passion. And they're just, do what they need to do. And so,
Yeah.
they're not totally into,
I would get 50% of the team, I would say, will come in and, they're there for exactly how long they need to be and out the door.
Mhm.
Don't do anything extra. Or in fact, sometimes do not quite enough. So,
my first job was at a manufacturing plant. Well, one of my first jobs in Missouri, rural Missouri. And we ran 3 shifts, including graveyard, right? And we had the majority of people who came in, and this was the old fashioned factory with the belts running. And you did the same thing to the same widget, one after the other. And the people who worked there, the largest percentage of them were actually farmers. But the land was really poor and they couldn't make a living at farming. So they came to work at our factory to earn a paycheck so that they could do what they loved, which was farming. And many of them chose swing and shift was their favorite, because they could get up early, be outside when it was, daylight. And then when they were tired, they came in and they came to work. And then they go home and crash. It was really, really interesting. Yeah. So there is some of that, right? Yeah. But
Yeah, I guess just a comment, yeah, for the team set, for the work setting, it makes sense that commitment and results might be lower because it's so strict and regimented. And then for class groups, like for mine, this was the group that I had after I dumped my old group in the circuits class.
and you got to choose.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so it was 6, 5, 7, 4, 7. And so the commitment and inattention to results are better. Even though accountability and conflict are kind of lower, so they could be possible dysfunction, but because everybody was kind of like, we just got to get this done. There wasn't a situation where we had to worry about accountability or conflict because we were unified in the other way.
Yeah, because you had a very short time frame, right? Like 4 weeks or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really, you can't really build a team in 4 weeks. Yeah. But interestingly, I think conflict and accountability really are tied. Because if you have a fear of conflict, it's really hard to get out of your comfort zone and hold somebody accountable. When we're talking about, accountability, we're not talking about hitting people over the head. We're like, hey, what's going on? What's going on with your stuff? Where are we? So, do you need help? You open the conversation, right? Annette, what do you have? Is it school, work, sports, what?
It is a Girl Scouts service team that I volunteered on. I did a 9-month term, only 1 term. So it was an interesting period of time for our our service area in Girl Scouts, we had a really domineering manager for a while, and council finally ousted her, and we started from scratch. So, so it was really interesting. My scores are 7, 4, 8, 4, 6.
So once again, we have conflict and accountability that are your low ones, right? Which makes sense. Fear of conflict.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you had, yes, as Eli saying, you had a dominating manager.
Yeah.
Was
So
probably-
everybody, we
Yeah.
all kind of just wanted to avoid that same thing happening again. There was so much negativity before she left. It had just really become toxic. So, so yeah, it was an interesting period for our service unit. And it was terrible for my mental health actually working with this group. So I only did the one term and then quit.
Yeah. And it's hard when you're a volunteer because if you're not there for the paycheck, right?
Right.
You're there to pay it forward, to offer something of value. And that is, to me, that is the worst thing that you can do as a manager is to boss around volunteers. And sadly, you know, I've done some volunteering, quite a bit actually, that oftentimes volunteers, it's their moment to shine and they want to be a big fish or in a little pond, right? And they want to be in charge even though they don't know how to be in charge, they don't have any skills, but they can be tyrants, right? And you can't fire, how do you fire a volunteer? Well, I actually have fired volunteers, but you find them other places and you convince them they're so needed. And this is like a prestigious move for them, if that's their motivation. But yeah, it's really hard. So was the person that you who was in charge, was that a paid position?
No.
So it was another volunteer. Yeah, that's really hard. And there's also an expectation, if you put in your time, you get to be in charge. Right? Yeah. So, good. All right. Well, so hopefully this gives a little bit of insight. Let me see if I actually started the recording. I don't remember how my sign up. Oh, I did. Okay. All right. Hey, you know, we do what we have to, right? Okay. So that's quite a bit on Teams. And, you know, I hope that this adds a little bit to the reading that you were doing. And I kind of want, as we kind of wrap up here, I want to circle back to the very beginning when I was talking about, well, I call it my rules of engagement, but most people will call it a team charter. And the first thing you put in your team charter is your mission statement, right? Who are we? What do we want to be? And what do we want to get out of this? So if you're on a team that's going to last for 2 years, it's important to figure out why you're there. The other thing that I think is important is to get a name. You need to start building an identity for your team, right? And that was something that was required in my MBA program, that 2 years to save team. And we called ourselves the Hourglass team. And you weren't, we refused to tell anybody what that meant. You know, some of them you could tell, they were the pizza lovers. Okay, that was pretty obvious. Ours was the Hourglass team. And for 2 years, people guessed what that meant. And the reason we chose that was we wanted to remember that while we were immersed in such a intense program, life was still moving by. The sands of time were still flowing and we still had family, and that we needed to think about balance in our world. So it's a very lovely thought.
It's a little existentially terrifying. I mean.
Well, and most of us were families, you know, came from families that had kids or were thinking of having kids. So, and then the Constitution, these are the bylaws. Okay, so what's important? What goes in them? So, you know, the principles, the operating principles, you're thinking about how do we function? Are we gonna meet in person? Are we gonna meet virtually? Are we gonna just share documents? What works for everybody, right? And how often? And are we gonna set deadlines, right? And agree on those deadlines, okay? Like, we'll brainstorm until week 3, and then we have a structure by week 5 or whatever. And then that second part, conflict resolution, is what do we do when somebody doesn't follow the bylaws? How do we handle it? And that's the part that most teams leave out of their charter. They just talk about, well, we'll all talk it out, right? Yeah. It's really important to have some sort of process. And so for the MBA groups that were 2 years in length that I taught, I had them post, we met in person in the same classroom every week. So I posted their team charters. And so when they would be in their groups working and they start storming, it's like, well, what does your team charter say? And they had to keep revising it. But it does work, and it does help because it helps keep you from that personalization. Like, oh, well, you know, so-and-so is always going to be a problem because they're lazy. Now, calling somebody lazy is a personal characteristic. It doesn't really talk about their performance. To say this person traditionally is late on their performance or doesn't turn something in, that's an outcome, right? So we need to think in terms of outcomes, not ascribing something, characteristics. And then we've all experienced virtual teams. So do you guys, for those of you who have done the online and remote, are you still doing teams in some of your classes?
Not as much.
Yeah, I think people like me, so being able to work in a team is part of our outcome for my department. So we usually incorporate it in a lot of our courses. But I think a lot of us felt like students were struggling just to show up at all in any way, shape, or form. You know, I had people who didn't have any bandwidth, people who had gone home to Texas or, you know, wherever. So, and students whose family members died of COVID. Yeah, that was very, very traumatic. So, you know, adding that virtual thing is just exponentially more complicated because you've got time and sometimes language, distances. So this accreditation group that I serve on, our board, it was global. And so we'd have meetings and there'd be somebody in India, somebody in Asia, somebody in Europe, US, all the time zones. And how do you find a time? So we took turns being the person that had to be there in the middle of the night, you know? So that it wasn't always the same person, but it kind of sucked. But, so it does, it makes it harder and more difficult. And I've also noticed that when somebody is communicating in a language that's not their first primary language, interpretation and syntax can make a big difference in how they interpret what is there. So some of the things we can do is, first of all, you need to make sure that they understand technology, right? So you got to give them the instructions, right? And there's an interesting research study, and I have seen this. You know, I teach part-time at PCC sometimes, but I've seen this when I've taught a traditional class. This the study was pretty big, and it had 2 groups: traditional 18 to 19-year-old first-year students, freshman, maybe sophomore, and then it had freshman, sophomore adult learners, or those coming back to finish their degree, but those who were over 28, I think it was. And it was a fully online course, okay? And I won't go through all the boring stuff, but the findings were shocking to a lot of people. The group that struggled the most and did the poorest was the traditionally aged group. And everybody thought, well, they'll be great because they get technology. The adult learners struggled with the technology, but they were so committed, they figured it out, they got help, and they excelled. And they knew that once they learned it, they didn't have to learn it every term because they would have it. The problem with the traditional ones wasn't the technology so much, it was self-discipline and motivation. Because they came out of an environment where they were told what to do, they went into an environment where they were the master of their own schedule, and particularly online, they're not even coming to a class at a certain time. So it was really, really interesting. But for those who need help, we need to make sure we give them the tools they need. And they learn how to be self-disciplined and I'm sure you guys have all figured that out and found that as a challenge sometimes in online, right? I mean, it is for instructors too. And it helps if you have emotional intelligence, right? This ability to monitor your own emotions and to see, recognize, and understand other people's emotions and adjust and adapt to those so that you can communicate in a non-conflict way. And again, that's our relationship people who really excel at this. Because with the virtual environment, we've taken away a lot of our really robust channels of communication, right? So if it's fully online, we don't even see each other. We don't hear each other. We don't hear voices. We don't see facial expressions if it's not a synchronous class. If it is synchronous, there's a little bit more, but it's also very two-dimensional, which is different. I was kind of surprised by that. So some of the things you can do is get the group together. So if it's a work group, even if people are scattered all over, you bring them together at least a couple of times a year. So they meet in person. And I have found there is nothing like establishing some sort of working bond than breaking bread together. Food is amazing. And people relax, they talk, they get to know each other. And then it's not your coworker, it's a human. And that makes a lot of difference in how you work together. So that's a really important one. But here are some of the things that will sync us with our teams, right? We have a lot of times, like with your school, you have time constraints. And that's a problem because you don't have time to really develop a high-performing team. We've talked about the person that sort of takes over the team and the rest, I think Annette called the silent majority. We just quiet down and we don't get involved. Sometimes we agree because we don't want people to think poorly of us. We don't want to be the one lone voice. And then groupthink is something you'll be reading about, which is, this is where the idea with this is a team becomes somewhat successful and they believe that they are the best and they don't let anything from the outside interfere. And they believe that they are always in agreement and you're not allowed to disagree because the team is so awesome. So you can begin to see what happens, right? It's almost like a cult and no new ideas come in. And from a competitive standpoint, that's a huge problem because you're not innovating, you're not sharing new ideas. And people feel this pressure they want to be part of the cool kid group, right? So constructive conflict is something we want to encourage so that we can hold each other accountable. And again, this is about focusing on the task, the work, the ideas, not on individual personality characteristics, okay? So this allows us to be innovative and to let our ideas freely form. And this is important in today's world because one of the things that we're tasked with that employers tell us they want is not just critical thinking, but innovative thinking and innovative problem solving. So we need to be able to not have this pressure to conform. We need to be able to really brainstorm. And this was part of the rules, the bylaws that I used to encourage, which is, I told you about the circle. You can only talk so long, and when you're brainstorming, there's never a but. So if I said, I really think that we should all paint our skin green, you guys are not allowed to criticize. You don't have to agree, but it's out there because everybody just, it's a free flow of ideas. And what happens is, then that goes to the next person, and somebody might say, hey, what if we adopt a turtle as our mascot? Because we're blah, blah, blah. So you never know what's gonna happen. You just have to let it flow, okay? All right, so here's where we are. You have reading and an assignment. Any questions on where we are, what we're doing? Help, otherwise? Questions in that? Okay, good. All right, I am gonna stop the recording, but I am gonna share Canvas